Hi everyone, Sean here from Lines in Wax, back at you with another video. It's been a while, so I've decided to come on and do a ranking video this time, as you can surely tell from the thumbnail and why you've clicked on the video, of the legendary neo-folk, acoustic, dance, post-punk, whatever, maniac, Douglas P, Death in June. It's been, nearly a year since I've done my Death in June politics video, easily the best video that's performed on Lines in Wax. Is easily my most popular video by far. So to celebrate the 1 year anniversary of that, let's go through Douglas P's discography as Death in June and rank the albums from worst to best, because ranking things is fun. I love doing this stuff. Basically what I will be doing for the sake of time is leaving out any Death in June collaborations or Death in June presents kind of releases, because there's a lot of those over the years, and of course any live albums I'll be leaving off too, which is a bit of a shame because there are some really good live albums out there from Death in June, but of course, just to save time, we'll be excluding those. We'll be focusing on studio albums only. So from worst to best then, here is Death in June's discography. In 16th place is Nadaized, released Christmas time, just before the turn to 2023. This was released in December 2022. It is basically Miro Snyder, is that how you say it? Miro Snyder, who's collaborated a lot with Death in June and Douglas P over the last decade or so. This time what they're doing is they are taking the acoustic Death in June stuff and redoing those songs in the style of Nada, which was more electronic 80s kind of dancey kind of feel. This is an absolute abortion of a record. It is fucking dreadful. Instead of actually making the songs sound like they came from Nada, they've actually made all these acoustic songs feel more modern, and they've just been reinterpreted by some random YouTuber who does synthwave remixes or something like that. The idea is fantastic, but the execution was fucking terrible. To actually make these acoustic songs sound like Nada, one would need a bunch of analog synthesizers and drum machines and possibly a reel-to-reel tape machine, not fucking VSTs and an installation of Reason or Reaper or whatever the fuck. And this is the stinger, right? You fucking need Tony Wakeford, because Douglas's half-spoken, half-sung approach that works on his acoustic stuff doesn't really sit all that well with the pulsing and modern synthwave style electronic music that Snyder has done here for us. I'm assuming I'm saying his name wrong. If I'm sorry, if I'm saying your name wrong, Myra, I'm sorry, or Miro. Apologies if I'm saying your name wrong. Speaking of which, the music sounds like third-rate bastardized electronic music that a weed-smoking film student would make after watching too many Dario Argento movies. It sounds like somebody kidnapped and drugged Carpenter Boot and composed these and forced him to compose these at gunpoint using a free trial of Reaper and a bunch of fucking shit VST plugins. Not good. Last place. Avoid. Completionist item. Don't bother. Brit harsh one to start with. In 15th place is Operation Hummingbird from 2000. Now, this can be used interchangeably with the one I've put in 14th place, so I'll do these at the same time. In 15th place is Operation Hummingbird, and 14th place is Take Care and Control. Two albums that Douglas did with Albin Julius, who helped him out on these. The live album for this area, Heiliger, is amazing. Is it Heiliger? Let me just double check that. Yeah, it is Heiliger. So, Operation Hummingbird and Take Care and Control. These aren't really good. These aren't really good at all. They're more like noise, really bad noise and sound collages, which don't really go anywhere. There are lyrics in there, and it's very cryptic and repetitive, and it's not very good. I see these both as part 1 and part 2 of the same era, and they just do nothing for me. Some of this stuff does appear on earlier albums, but like in limited amounts to certain degrees, and we'll come back to this when we pick up those other albums. But here, this is, it's kind of like they dropped everything that Death in June was and made it something else into this martial industrial like sound collage project, and it's just not very good. So that's why they're so far down the list. Take it or leave them. Really can't be bothered. Never really listen to them ever again. In 13th place is Burial, which was the band's second album back in their like post-punk days when they were transitioning away from like their initial post-punk sound into something a bit different, which is what would then establish itself in the albums that came after this. But this second album it's a bit of a cop-out because it's not really an album, because half of it is new studio stuff and half of it is just fucking dreadful live recordings. So it's a bit of a cop-out in that regard. The songs that are here are pretty good, but they're not particularly significant in any way, shape or form, to be honest with you. So that's why it's down here, this far low down in the list. But it is quite interesting. If you're a fan of the band's earlier work, then it's definitely worth checking this out as a historical document to see how they progressed. But as an album, it's not very good, to be honest, at all. In 12th place is The Wall of Sacrifice. And again, this has a similar fate as Take Care of Control and the Operation Hummingbird records, in that there's not really something that attaches me to this album. It's not a very good effort. It does have its moments. There's a lot of sound collages, as I said, and other pointless shit. Let's be honest, it's pointless. The art is pretty iconic, though. There's several different versions of this released over the years, and all of them have amazing artwork, and there are a lot of regular collaborators that would come up throughout Douglas's career as Death in June, such as Rose McDowell and David Tibet, and I think Boyd Rice comes on this one. The saving grace for this record, the saving grace for this album, is the song Fall Apart, which I think might be my favourite Death in June song, to be honest with you. In an album of mediocre stuff and just pointless SoundCloud bullshit, in the middle of it you've got Fall Apart, which is just stunning, to be honest with you. Bring in the Night is pretty good too, but Fall Apart is fantastic. If you've somehow never heard Fall Apart, but you are a fan of Death in June, you need to hear that song. It is by far, I think, his best song. In number 11, then, is The Guilty Have No Pride. This is Death in June's first album from 1983. It's a completely different style to all of the other stuff that they would do. It's in the post-punk style, really kind of, it's like Joy Division, but a lot darker and a lot weirder. And you know, that's probably a terrible fucking way of putting it, but, you know, it's got songs on it like the title track, All Alone in Nirvana, Till the Living Flesh is Burned. I've really grown to like these songs over the years. And Heaven Street as well. There's another version of Heaven Street from their earlier EP that appears on this album. And to be fair, you know, I don't really like post-punk that much, but I do like The Guilty Have No Pride. It's interesting to see what primitive kind of beginnings Death in June came from before they moved and changed into all their different styles over the years. And it's an interesting record. And it is a part of history. That cover is, you know, make of that cover what you will, it is pretty gnarly, and it does stand out. I don't particularly agree with the use of these symbols, as you know, as we covered in the Death in June politics video, but you know, there it is. I can't change it. It's been there since before I was born. So yeah, as a record, it's pretty cool, and it's well worth checking out. In 10th place is Essence. This is the last studio album that Douglas has done in 2018. I don't count Nadaized as new. Well, Nadaized isn't new songs, is it? So, you know, this is the last album of actually original material that Douglas has done, and I don't think he's going to do any more from what I've read. I like Essence. The sound on Essence is great. It's really well produced, I think. There's some of the great songs on here. I love Snipers in the Maiden, God, A Pale Curse. Another one of my favourite songs on here is The Trigger. That's one of my favourite Death in June songs. The downside with Essence, and I think the reason why I've put it so low on this list, even though it's a full album of, you know, unique standout, actually composed acoustic songs, is that they all kind of start to sound the same. It's a very verse, chorus, flowery kind of like percussion over the top of the acoustic stuff, and it all starts to blur together, which is not something that happens on the other acoustic albums that are totally acoustic. And you know, even though they all sound like one session, the songs do stand apart. However, other than some standout songs that I just said, on Essence that isn't the case. The songs don't tend to stand out as much, and they're not as good as the acoustic stuff that he performed earlier in his career. So it's a good album, but it's fairly low on the list for those reasons that I just said. So moving on then, in number 9 is Peaceful Snow. Again, another interesting kind of, idea, I suppose. This is often paired with loungecore, which is, so it's like a double album. So replacing the acoustic guitar is the piano from Miro Snyder. Sorry again for messing up your name, I'm an idiot. Peaceful Snow is new songs, I believe, right, of Douglas that are composed and then were put to piano, and then loungecore is I think the old stuff, which is, I always get these snow, because when I first got into Death in June, you had the Snow Bunker tapes, you had the fucking Peaceful Snow, then you had loungecore, and they were all on Spotify, more or less, with very similar looking covers, and I'd always get them all mixed up. So I'm still in my head finding it hard to unlearn that mix up. But yeah, Peaceful Snow as its own, great idea, but the execution again suffers the same fate as Essence. It isn't super interesting. Everything starts to blur together after a while. Now, I've seen like videos of these songs being performed live, and they really hit live. It works so much better with a piano live, personally. Specifically the title track, Peaceful Snow. But as a record, it's not something I sit down and listen to all that often. So there is a way to improve on this, however, and that's number 8, the Snow Bunker tapes. This came out after Peaceful Snow, and it's basically the songs that were on Peaceful Snow, but this is their original acoustic version. So these are whatever the versions that Douglas wrote before he passed it off to Miro in order to make it into piano compositions. So what we get is Peaceful Snow songs with acoustic guitar rather than piano. So this is more of a regular Death in June release then, in that we get those songs but in the more normal neo-folk style, dare I say. So it's not much of an improvement on Peaceful Snow, because it's more or less the same thing, but it's the songs redone with a different instrument essentially. So I prefer the acoustic guitar than I do the piano, at least on the recorded versions. If I'm sitting down and listening to a studio album, I prefer this. I prefer the Snow Bunker tapes over Peaceful Snow, so that's why it pips it slightly and gets a slightly higher rating on the ranking. So what comes up next then? It's we're in the home stretch now, really. We've gone from the shit stuff into the mediocre stuff, and this is probably the last mediocre album, and everything after this is pretty solid. So in 7th place then, the last mediocre album is All Pigs Must Die. Now, it pains me to say that, because when I think of Death in June, I think of All Pigs Must Die, because those songs are iconic. That fucking album art is absolutely iconic. It is terrifying. I remember I was in doing GCSE art, and my teacher, who introduced me to all sorts of mad shit, like Unseen Terror and Napalm Death, and like when I was in my early teens, this shit was completely unknown to me. These were the days of the internet was quite primitive. We didn't have fucking Spotify, we didn't have YouTube, so he would show me this mad stuff. And one day he put this, he had the CD in a fucking secondary school. He had All Pigs Must Die, the CD version. And he put it in front of me and he said, "What do you think that sounds like then? What do you think this is about?" And I saw the fucking image of Douglas in the mask holding a knife to a throat with a pig, and well, that stayed with me forever. And I remember him saying, like, "Oh, I bet you think that's going to be some fucking," well, he didn't swear, obviously, but "I bet you think there's going to be some mad Norwegian stuff, don't you? Like black metal or something." So, he didn't really wait for an answer, and he put All Pigs Must Die into the CD tray, and I sat there like 14, 15 years old, migrating from my obsession with black metal into grindcore, and I had no time for the twinkly acoustic tracks that came from the speakers, at that time. But I remember vividly that was my introduction to Death in June, and so this album sticks out to me. And when I got into Death in June, songs like All Pigs Must Die, TikTok, all those kind of, like, the first half of this album is stunning. It's absolutely flawless, and it's got that really haunting fucking, flute and stuff, and trumpets, and I think even maybe accordions in this. It really pops. It is some of the best Death in June acoustic neo-folk stuff. And then it falls off a fucking cliff in the second half, because it goes into that fucking SoundCloud bullshit again, which just doesn't work. You know what I mean? I love noise, I love power electronics, but it just doesn't seem to hit when Douglas does it. He has his own unique kind of kind of spooky, tense style to making these sound collages, but it just doesn't work for me, especially when the acoustic stuff is so good. To cut that short, to fill this fucking thing with all that stuff, all that sound collage stuff, just it's a real shame for me, to be honest. And I do hope I do wish there were more songs on this album in that initial neo-folk style, because some of the neo-folk stuff on here is some of the best, and like I said, it's some of the more iconic Death in June stuff. So it's basically an EP. If you take all the fucking crap noise collage, sound collage stuff off here, it's All Pigs Must Die as an EP. It's flawless. It would be up there in the top 3 without a shadow of a doubt. But because it's got all that sound collage stuff bogging it down, it kind of fits here. But again, I don't want to be too negative on this, because the stuff at the start, the acoustic stuff at the start, with the acoustic guitar and the accordions and the flutes and trumpets, is fucking fantastic. So yeah, that's why it's in the position it's in. And in 6th place then is 1986's The World That Summer. Now this is, for me, prime era Death in June. So it's after, Tony Wakeford and stuff left the band, but you've got Douglas on his own. The acoustic elements are starting to creep in, but you've still got all those like retro 80s kind of electronic elements of synths and those like really primitive drum sounds, and the entire album just smacks of that. Again, very iconic, very controversial art with those kind of symbols on there. If you're a lefty like me, it instantly makes you go, oh fucking hell, look at that art. But it's like some of the songs on here are just fucking stunning, really. It's not my favorite album in regards to in regards to the actual compositions, but as a development in the sound, it's really important to me in Death in June's history. It's what I would count the 3rd full album, but obviously there's Burial as well, so it's technically the 4th. It still retains a lot of the dance and drum machine elements of Nada, but Douglas's, like I said, Douglas' experimental and acoustic sides are starting to flourish more, and that's why this is why it's important. The whole album has like this treacle-like pace that takes forever to go through, despite a few more upbeat numbers here or there. And the music doesn't really match the cover. Like, you've got those symbols, whatever you make of them, and that pitch black cover, and the music seems to be a bit more chill, for lack of a better word. But coming off the back of Nada, though, I can't really get into it as much as Nada, and it does kind of pale a little bit in comparison, but still really good, solid album, a solid piece of work all the way through. In 5th place then, The Rule of Thirds from 2008, kind of part of that snowbunkery kind of period, kind of has the similar kind of sound and production as all those albums, but The Rule of Thirds is, to me, his most consistent and solid neo-folk album. That's just like straight up, no fucking weird effects, no dicking around. It's just a guitar, it's just his voice. You've got The Rule of Thirds. There are some amazing songs on this. My Rhine Atrocity, I absolutely adore the Perfume of Traitors. The opening chords of Perfume of Traitors is just fantastic. But yeah, this is a solid later career effort in the late 2000s. After that experimental period with Take Care and Control and fucking Operation Hummingbird and then All Pigs Must Die, it was so good to see Douglas return just to the acoustic guitar and not really much else. Some sparse instrumentation, and I love the art of this as well. There's various versions, but it's just so weird, like that kind of like stick figure in the background. Very unusual stuff. Really good stuff indeed. So number 4 then, this is the home straight now. These are all absolute bangers. Number 4, But What Ends When These Symbols Shatter from 1992. Probably, I would say this is the most popular Death in June record. I would say this is the one that most people would put at number 1. On Rate Your Music, it's the only one that's bolded, I think. So, it's the one that people gravitate to. Really nice production, lush production. The guitars almost sound like they're waves of water. They're so washed out, but they do sound fantastic. And this album is just chock full of the tracks that define Death in June, the songs that he still plays live, or still played live right till the end, like the title track, Cuckoo Coo, The Giddy Edge of Light, Little Black Angel, Because of Him, He's Disabled, Death is the Martyr of Beauty, fantastic. The song Little Black Angel is probably one of the first songs I heard outside of Stuff on All Pigs Must Die, and that and He's Disabled really kind of like sold the neo-folk sound to me, back in the days of me getting into neo-folk. So yeah, if you're going to start with Death in June, there is absolutely no reason not to start with this one. It's like solid from start to finish. One of the best and probably one of the most influential neo-folk records, I think, that have ever been released. So yeah, it's not number one because I think Death in June has better records, but you can't really go wrong with this, to be honest with you, at all. In third place is 1995's incredibly dodgily named Rose Clouds of Holocaust. This came after What Ends When the Symbols Shatter, and to be honest, it blows that album out of the water. I prefer the songs on this. I prefer the production on this. It's not as how can I say, watery and washed out and wishy-washy and ethereal, I suppose, as But What Ends When the Symbols Shatter. The production on Rose Clouds is more grounded. It still has like a depth to it. It isn't just like the later stuff where it's just an acoustic guitar and Douglas, and it's quite raw and up front. No, this is incredibly well produced. It's just not quite as far in the ether as But What Ends When the Symbols Shatter. Again, songs here are off the charts, incredible songs. Symbols of the Sun, Luther's Army, 13 Years, Carrion, and of course the title track, Rose Clouds of Holocaust, all are absolutely stunning songs, fantastic compilations, very compositions, not compilations, very well produced, very well made songs. This is peak Death in June. If you can look past the album cover, the album name, something he has tried to explain away, perhaps only due to the records being banned in some countries with that name. But honestly, these songs could be dodgy. They could be about all sorts of sketchy right-wing stuff. Maybe they're not. The ambiguity of Douglas P is part of the reason I still talk about him. It's quite interesting. I don't really understand it all quite clearly, so it's quite, the duality there is quite interesting. But yeah, I mean, this is amazing. This is one of the best neo-folk records I've ever heard. It's fantastic. And I think even though I've rated albums higher than this is probably the best representation, I would say, of Death in June's sound. I would probably give this, Rose Clouds of Holocaust, or even number 4, What Ends When the Symbols Shatter, to some people that are new to Death in June. That's what I would suggest. It doesn't get better than this in regards to the sound of Death in June, but I personally prefer others, and that's what we're going to talk about now. In number 2, then, Brown Book. It was a fucking really difficult choice to put what was number 1 and what was number 2. Brown Book, to me, is... Remember when I said about But What the World That Summer, it had that sound developing from the early days, and still retained the electronic stuff, and it was moving into more neo-folk territory, or defining the neo-folk genre. This is really early stuff. So 1987's Brown Book, again with the Death's Head Skull. The man really loves his Death's Head Skulls. This album is banned in Germany, of course. It does have some interesting song titles like Hail the White Grain, Runes and Men. It's one of the ones that I started listening to and I was like, okay, maybe there's something more going on here with his politics. But, you can explain this all the way, but I'm not here to talk about his politics today, so I'm going to stop. This is amazing. This is a perfect mix for me of the dirgy, like, electronic stuff and the acoustic stuff. The song Hail the White Grain, one of my favourite Death in June songs, probably second favourite to Fall Apart. The song Touch Defiles, like, there's like this sampled loop of like these screaming people in the background. I don't know where that's taken from, but it makes the song, because it's got this like dirgy, kind of dirty electronic sound, like this reverb heavy 80s production, and then like Douglas is kind of like softly singing over the top of it. Then you got that screaming noise in the background, and it's just like, what the fuck? This is such a strange vibe. Runes and Men, beautiful song. To Drown a Rose is kind of like almost like 80s pop, but really baroque in its own way, with Rose McDowell on the guest vocals there. Yeah, and then it does kind of go off a bit as you go into side B. It does kind of lose its direction a bit. There are other versions of this album other than the original that have like songs later on which I really like Europa, Gates of Heaven, the Gates of Hell. Love that song, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I listened to death. I listened Brown Book to death when I was, in my early 20s. I really love this one. So, it's right up there for me. Only pipped to number 1 by, it can only be one album left at this point. And in first place, it is Nada. Easily my favorite Death in June record, by a country mile. Like, it's way better than all the others, including Brown Book. Which is funny because it doesn't really sound like Death in June. This is an album that stands unique, just like The Guilty Have No Pride. Nada has its own sound. It's kind of self-contained to that era. It doesn't really bleed that much. As I said, it does, but not really. The neo-folk stuff kind of takes over from this point, and the electronic stuff kind of just gets phased out. But this is the one Death in June album I've listened to more than any other. I love the electro kind of industrial sounds to the electronic elements, very minimal, sinister sounding electronics. It's almost like dark wave kind of poppy synthesizer stuff, but it's still got that unusual edge to it underneath, you know what I mean? So another thing on this is that, of course, it's Douglas Pierce's vocals aren't quite as forward in the, the name of this, in the forefront of the songs, because you've got, Tony Wakeford still here, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like the second vocalist is different. So when Douglas does these songs later on, they don't sound quite the same as they did on here. Like, I absolutely love The Honor of Silence, The Call-In, Leopard. There's a song called Foretold at the end of side A, which is just got the most mesmerizing beat and bass line to it, which is really like low key, and it's really unusual. It just gets, it wraps around my brain. It really is amazing. And then side B has She Said Destroy, one of the greatest Death in June songs, as well as Carousel and Crush My Love. If you like 80s, music and you don't mind it being dark and weird and twisted, then definitely try out Nada. But yeah, that's it, man. That's Death in June's albums ranked from worst to best. It's been great fun getting back into this. I'll do some more rankings over the next couple of weeks, and I'll get those uploaded as well. But I don't know when my next retrospective will be. I'm very busy at the moment, but I don't want to let this channel die. So yeah, thank you for watching. If you've watched to the end, then you're an absolute trooper. Thank you for listening to this rant, as it were. And if you've not heard any of these Death in June albums, I would definitely go out and check them out, even some of the ones at the bottom of the list, because they are all interesting listens in their own way. It's just some of them aren't very good. they're all musical experiments, and I appreciate Death in June for always pushing that kind of pushing the barrier every time they release a record, but it doesn't always pay off, unfortunately. But I appreciate the artistic merit nonetheless. So thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next one, and have a good day, have a good time, and enjoy yourselves. Yeah, take care. Ta-ra now.